It didn't growl. It didn't run. It begged. In the heart of a blizzard, a wild bobcat stood on its hind legs, right outside Ethan Cole's door, paws together like it was pleading for something. For him. This wasn't some fluke encounter. Months ago, Ethan had dragged this same animal from wildfire rubble and watched it vanish into the smoke. He thought that was the end. He was wrong. Now it was back, eyes burning, body tense, and it wanted Ethan to follow into the deep woods, into the unknown. What would drive a predator to return like this? And what else was waiting out there?
It began with stillness, a quiet so deep it pressed against the trees like snowdrift, muffling even memory. The Sierra Nevada, blanketed in January frost, stood in patient silence. Trees locked in brittle posture, air too cold to breathe deeply, sky the color of old slate, and Ethan Cole. He stood outside the ranger station, shoulders hunched against the wind, his gloved hands wrapped around a dented metal thermos. 58 years old, his face weathered like old timber. A man carved by fire, literal and not. Once a firefighter in these very forests, now the sole caretaker of a decommissioned ranger post, nobody remembered. The wind shifted, something creaked, Ethan turned and froze. A bobcat stood in the snow, 20 feet away. Its fur was winter thick, frosted along the back. Amber eyes locked with his. Small, maybe 30 pounds, but unmistakably wild. The bobcat rose on its hind legs, front paws curling together, trembling slightly. As if pleading, the thermos slipped from Ethan's hand, thunking into snow. No way. The last time he'd seen a bobcat this close was 7 months ago, early July, the air thick with ash and adrenaline. Lightning had sparked a blaze that swept through Old Creek Ridge. He remembered hacking through a downed cottonwood, finding a kitten caught beneath blackened logs. Left rear leg cut, badly. He freed it, cleaned the wound, poured iodine while it trembled, then let it limp away. He'd logged it with Wildlife Services. Case W387B, no follow-up, no expectation. But now the cat's left rear leg bore a thin, pale scar just above the joint. Same animal. Ethan took a step forward.
The bobcat dropped to all fours. It didn't run. Instead, it turned, walked 5 paces, then stopped, looked back. Another step. Waited again. Ethan's breath fogged in the air. Was it asking him to follow? He stepped over the thermos. The snow crunched beneath his boots. The bobcat turned and moved again, deeper into the forest. He thought he'd saved a wild animal, but now it was asking him to save something else.
It had been one of those July afternoons that tasted like ash and adrenaline. Ethan had been called up as a temporary consultant during the Old Creek Ridge fire. The younger crews respected him. Many had trained under him back when he still ran headfirst into infernos. That day, he wasn't on the front lines. He was scouting perimeters, clearing deadfall before embers could leap the ridge. The smoke was a red haze along the tree line. Everything smelled of scorched pine and dry fear. He'd almost missed it. A snapped branch too clean, a soft whimper beneath fallen logs. He knelt. Beneath a blackened lattice of timber, something trembled, small. Fur singed at the edges. A juvenile bobcat, no more than 5 or 6 months old, pinned awkwardly by its haunch, its hind leg, twisted under a charred log, bled into the dust. Ethan's breath caught. He moved slowly, whispering nothing words, not to calm the cat, it wouldn't understand, but to calm himself. He remembered murmuring things like, "Easy now," and "You're okay, kid," as if voice could soften wild fear. The kitten hissed, weakly, but it didn't fight. Using a pry bar and gloved hands, he shifted the upper branches away. When the log lifted just enough, the cat dragged itself free with a limp shuffle. Its left hind leg was torn open, a long gash, raw and rimmed with soot. He opened his pack, poured iodine over the wound. It flinched, claws twitching. Then he wrapped the leg with clean gauze, bound it tight with medical tape. He didn't try to cage it or carry it out. He just sat beside it for a while, let the silence return between them. When it finally stood, shaky, panting, it gave him one look, quick, cautious, and then limped into the trees, gone. He'd returned to base, filed the report, marked the GPS, noted the injury, the species, the approximate age. The officer on duty raised an eyebrow. "A bobcat? You sure it wasn't a feral cat?" "I know what I saw." And that was that. A line in a database, forgotten. Until now, back in the present, that same bobcat, older now, coat thicker, eyes deeper, stood in the snow just beyond Ethan's reach. Its left leg bore a narrow, pale scar just above the joint. No doubt, same cat. But what stunned Ethan more than its return was its behavior. It should have bolted, it should have vanished into the trees like all wild things do. Instead, it had approached, stood up, begged. And now, as it led him deeper into the woods, it moved with uncanny control. It didn't dart or stalk, it trotted ahead, paused often, glanced over its shoulder, checking, leading. There was purpose here. Ethan followed, boots crunching softly in the undergrowth. Snow brushed against his knees as he pushed through the low boughs. His breath steamed in the bitter air. Every few yards the bobcat waited. Each time it looked back. Each time Ethan hesitated, then kept walking. His chest tightened, not with fear, but with something quieter. Heaviness, memory pressing against rib and bone. He'd saved a wild animal, but he hadn't expected it to remember, and he never dreamed it would come back for him. He followed the bobcat into the trees, but he wasn't prepared for who else was waiting. The forest swallowed sound. Beyond the abandoned ranger station, past the old footbridge long buried under snowdrifts, the trees closed in like cathedral pillars. Pines dusted white, oaks heavy with icicles. Every branch seemed to bow under the weight of winter. And something else, a hush that felt sacred, undisturbed. Ethan followed. The bobcat moved ahead, silent as shadow, always within view, always pausing when the path twisted too sharply or when the snow deepened past Ethan's shins. It would stop, sit, watch him, then rise and continue. This wasn't animal instinct, this was something more. The sun, a pale ghost above the treetops, barely touched the forest floor. Light fractured through frost-covered limbs, casting long, slanting shadows that danced with each gust of wind. Ethan pulled his scarf higher. The cold had teeth. Each step was slower now, not from exhaustion, though that crept into his joints, but because of what pressed on the air around him. An expectancy, like being inside a held breath. He noticed things he wouldn't have yesterday. How the bobcat's tracks followed a barely visible trail, one that wove through thick brush and along old animal paths. How its body never tensed in fear, only urgency, as if it trusted the forest, but not the clock. Ethan glanced around. Too quiet. Even in winter there should be crows, jays, the rustle of something small under snowpack. But the woods were mute, like everything was holding still. Then he saw it. Not the source, not yet, but signs, a branch, splintered unnaturally, a patch of blood in the snow, rust-red and frozen. The bobcat stood beside it, tail flicking. Ethan crouched, not fresh, but not old either. The bobcat turned, continued. More time passed. 10 minutes, maybe 20. Hard to say. The cold bent time like river glass. Then the air shifted. It wasn't sound exactly, more like a disturbance. A vibration at the edge of perception. A cry, high, piercing, distant. Not the bobcat. Ethan stopped breathing. Another cry, sharper now, closer, desperate, pain. The bobcat stood still, head tilted toward the sound. Then it looked back at Ethan. Waited. Ethan's heart thudded. He nodded once, mostly to himself, then kept moving, through underbrush and across a frozen stream, slipping once on the bank. He caught himself with a grunt, palms sinking into icy slush. Cold bit through his gloves. He kept going. The cries grew clearer, not continuous but sharp, like someone, something, calling for help in broken intervals. Ethan pushed through a thicket, branches scraping his jacket, and stopped. Below him, a shallow ravine carved through the snow. At the base, a small form tangled beneath a fallen fence post wrapped in ancient, rusted barbed wire. The snow around it was stained and churned. One leg, twisted unnaturally, kicked weakly. A coyote pup, young, maybe 4 or 5 months. Its fur was thick, but matted with blood, its muzzle pulled back in a silent snarl, more panic than threat. And circling it, tail low, ears alert, was the bobcat. No aggression, no fear. It paced, not with dominance, but with worry. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Coyote and bobcat, natural enemies, and yet the bobcat turned toward him, eyes wide, body still. Ethan stepped down slowly into the ravine. Snow gave way beneath his boots. The coyote whimpered. The bobcat didn't move. Neither did Ethan. He knelt.
The fence post had come from old grazing territory farther west, probably carried by a storm or pushed by time. The barbed wire had coiled around the pup's rear leg and belly, slicing deep. Ethan looked to the bobcat. No fear, no retreat, only waiting. That was when it hit him, not with logic, but with a slow, aching certainty. The bobcat had brought him here, not for itself, but for this. In the silence of the forest, he realized this was no accident. It was a call for help.
Ethan moved closer, boots crunching softly in the snow. Each step felt like trespass. The ravine cradled the injured coyote in a crooked embrace, its body half buried beneath the broken fence post. The barbed wire wrapped around one hind leg like a cruel bracelet, tightened by every futile kick. Blood had melted a dark basin into the snow. The coyote's eyes, pale amber and too bright, locked with his. No growl, no bark, just a gaze full of pain and pleading. The bobcat stood a few feet away, unmoving now, like a sentinel. Ethan exhaled slowly and lowered himself to his knees. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice barely louder than the breeze. "I'm not here to hurt you." He unclipped his pack, pulled out his multi-tool with gloved hands, now clumsy from cold and adrenaline. The metallic snick of the blade sliding free echoed like a gunshot. The coyote flinched. So did the bobcat. Ethan paused, steadied his hands, one strand of wire at a time. The steel was stiff with rust, brittle but sharp. The first cut sprang free with a metallic twang. The second snagged his glove, slicing through to the skin. He didn't feel it. Time blurred. Above him, the bobcat paced a slow circle around them, not restless, guarding. Its eyes flicked toward the trees now and then, as if watching for something Ethan couldn't see. The final loop of wire fell away. Ethan reached gently beneath the pup and lifted its leg. The wound was deep, red-rimmed, frozen blood crusted the fur. He grabbed gauze from his kit, pressed it firm, wrapping it tight with strips of fabric he'd torn from his own undershirt. The pup let out a soft yelp, but didn't bite. When Ethan sat back on his heels, his breath fogged the air between them. The pup trembled violently. Shock was setting in. Ethan needed to move. He stood, scanning the tree line, too far from the station to carry the animal in his arms. He looked around. Nearby lay a fallen pine branch, thick and straight. He gathered others, thinner, rope-like roots still frozen in loops. He began building a crude sled, branches lashed together with paracord and the leftover wire. a flat drag that might just hold the pup if he pulled steady. The whole time, the bobcat watched. At one point, it came closer, not threatening, not afraid, just near. It sat beside the pup, pressed its body gently against the coyote's trembling side. No snarl, no raised hackles, just warmth. Ethan stared. Nature didn't do this. Predators didn't offer comfort to rivals. But there it was, silent empathy, written in fur and breath. He slid the pup onto the sled, anchoring it with loops of cloth. The animal whimpered once, then lay still. And just as he began to drag the sled up the slope, he saw it. To the left of the ravine, half buried under a drift, a steel trap. Open, empty, fresh bait still tied inside. 10 feet further, another. This one held the frozen remains of a deer, the leg torn and stiff, eyes glazed over with frost. Illegal traps, dozens of them, sprinkled like landmines through the underbrush. Ethan's jaw clenched. Rage twisted in his gut, old, familiar. Not fire this time, but cruelty, man's brand. The kind that laced trees with wire and left living things to bleed alone. He turned back toward the station, muscles aching already. The bobcat followed at his side. Neither of them looked back. As he trudged through the snow, sled creaking behind him, Ethan spoke aloud, not for the pup, not even for himself, but for the wild heart beside him. "You didn't just remember," he said softly. "You brought me back for this." The bobcat gave no sign it heard, but it stayed close, closer than shadow. In the place where enemies should never meet, mercy stood between them, on 4 silent paws. The return hike was slow and grueling. Ethan's breath came in sharp bursts, each one clawing at his throat. The drag sled groaned over roots and snagged in drifts. The pup whimpered now and then, but mostly lay still, its breath shallow. The bobcat moved beside them, not leading this time, but flanking, a quiet sentinel. At times it would pause to listen, head tilting toward some unseen sound. Then it would keep pace, never once drifting far. They hadn't gone 100 yards before Ethan spotted another trap. This one was half hidden under a mound of leaves, wire arched and ready. He stopped, leaned on his knees and stared at it. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. He scanned the surrounding snow, found 4 more, 3 armed, 1 already sprung. It wasn't just neglect, it was deliberate. Someone had laid a web across this whole stretch of forest, close to trails, near animal paths, and no tags or markings. Illegal, dangerous, murder wrapped in steel. The bobcat circled one of them, ears back, not afraid, furious. Ethan pulled a stick from the underbrush and tripped the trap. The steel jaws snapped closed with a vicious clang. He looked down at the sled. The pup stirred, a weak sound, barely audible. "We'll get you out of this," Ethan whispered. He pressed onward. Step by step, the ranger station's silhouette grew larger through the trees. The old beams and tilted roof never looked so welcoming. Smoke still curled faintly from the chimney, where he'd left the fire burning low. He reached the porch and pulled the sled up the steps, the boards groaning under weight and years. Inside, warmth hit like a wave. It smelled of cedar smoke and old wool blankets. Ethan cleared space near the hearth, laying the pup gently onto folded towels and fleece. The leg had bled through the wrappings. He'd need to call in help, but for now, warmth and stillness were the first medicine. Then the bobcat stepped inside. No hesitation, just crossed the threshold like it belonged. It approached the pup, lowered itself beside it, and pressed close. Fur to fur, wild enemy to wild kin. Ethan sat back, breathless. He'd lived through fires, floods, storms that dropped trees like matchsticks. But he'd never witnessed something like this, not even close. He watched them for a long time. The bobcat didn't sleep. It stayed alert, eyes blinking slowly, ears twitching with every creak of the old building. But it stayed, close, protective. And outside, night thickened. Around midnight, Ethan heard a sound beyond the door, a single crunch of snow. He peered through the frost-glazed window, fingers resting lightly on the curtain edge. A shape stood at the edge of the clearing, large, still, a full-grown coyote. Its eyes glinted under the moonlight, ears high, muscles tense but not aggressive, just watching. Ethan opened the door quietly. The coyote didn't move. Behind him, the bobcat rose to its feet. It walked to the threshold and stood beside Ethan. No growl, no bristle of fur, just recognition, predators, rivals, but not tonight. The adult coyote lowered its head slightly, a gesture, not of submission, but of acknowledgement. Then turned, vanished into the trees. Ethan whispered, "I think he knows." The bobcat sat at the doorway for a while after, then returned to the pup and curled beside it again. Ethan crossed to the radio, flipped on the emergency frequency. Static crackled, then a slow tone. "Forest Dispatch, this is Station 12. Do you copy?" A pause, then a crackle of life. "Copy, Station 12. Go ahead." "This is Ethan Cole. I've got an injured juvenile coyote here, leg wrapped in barbed wire. Needs vet assistance." "Confirmed. We'll dispatch wildlife services." He hesitated. "And you might want to bring a biologist too." "Say again?" "There's another animal, not injured, but you'll want to see this." He clicked off the mic, turned back to the firelight. The pup's breathing had steadied, faint but rhythmic. The bobcat lay still, tail wrapped around its body, eyes half closed. Ethan lowered himself into the old rocking chair near the hearth. His bones ached, his fingers were raw, but his heart felt cracked open. Like something had broken and something else had quietly filled the space. In the deepest dark of the Sierra, two creatures who should have been enemies now slept side by side, and a man who thought his days of saving lives were over found that mercy doesn't always knock. Sometimes it scratches at the door with a paw. He'd built a shelter for himself, but tonight it became something else, a sanctuary for the impossible. The storm held off. By morning, the fire had settled into a quiet smolder, casting amber light across the ranger station's worn wooden floors. Ethan sat wrapped in a heavy wool blanket, half asleep, the old rocker creaking gently beneath him. The pup lay nestled on the makeshift bed by the hearth, its breathing shallow but more regular. Gauze wrapped snugly around its hind leg, secured with tape and prayer. The bleeding had stopped during the night. But what Ethan couldn't stop watching was the bobcat. It hadn't moved far, still curled beside the pup, its tail rising and falling with each breath. Every now and then it would shift, lick the pup's ear or nose with quiet precision, then settle again. It wasn't just sharing heat, it was sharing presence. A low, wild hum of protection vibrated between them. Ethan rubbed his eyes, unsure if he was dreaming. Never, in all his years out here, had he seen anything like this. He stirred the fire, added a fresh log. The light flared, the bobcat blinked. Outside, the world remained still. Trees coated in frost, the sky a milky blue. The quiet was different now, not hollow but full, expectant. A soft thump on the porch made Ethan straighten. He stepped to the door and opened it slowly. The adult coyote stood again at the edge of the clearing, still, watchful. Ethan didn't speak. Behind him, the bobcat rose, stretched, walked to the door, sat in the threshold. This time the coyote stepped closer, 10 feet, 8, Its paws left perfect prints in the snow, but its eyes never left the bobcat. Or perhaps the station beyond. A slow moment passed. Then it sat. That was all. Ethan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The wind rustled the trees, the forest breathed. And for the next hour, that's how they remained. The coyote outside, waiting. The bobcat inside, keeping guard. The pup asleep, dreaming in firelight. At 9:04 a.m., the radio crackled. Station 12, this is Warden Team Delta. En route, ETA 15 minutes. Ethan keyed the mic. Copy that, we'll be ready. He didn't mention the scene unfolding outside. Didn't have the words. 15 minutes later, the crunch of tires on icy gravel. A dark green SUV rolled into the clearing, headlights slicing through the trees. Two figures stepped out. Maya Ortega, field biologist, early 30s, sharp eyes under a wool cap. And Luis Tanaka, a fresh-faced ranger, barely old enough to shave. Ethan met them halfway, boots crunching. "You're not going to believe this," he said quietly. Inside, Maya crouched beside the coyote pup, checking vitals with practiced hands. "This one's lucky," she murmured. "Infection hasn't set in yet. Deep cut, though." Luis stood frozen near the door. Sir?" Ethan followed his gaze. The bobcat, still sitting beside the pup. "It hasn't left," Luis whispered. "No," Ethan said. "It brought me here." Maya looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" He told them everything. From the scar, the begging posture, the trail through the forest, the traps. They listened in stunned silence. "You're saying it led you to the pup?" Maya asked. Ethan nodded. "I wouldn't have found it otherwise." Outside, the adult coyote hadn't moved. It watched from the edge of the clearing, silent as stone. Maya walked to the window. "Well," she whispered, "we're going to need more sleds." Luis helped prep the pup for transport, while Maya gently examined the bobcat from a distance. "No collar, no tag, no chip," she murmured. "Completely wild." "Wild," Ethan said, "but not alone." In the stillness of morning, where predators once circled, a fragile peace had taken root, and it was holding. Maya knelt by the hearth one last time, smoothing the fur between the pup's ears. "Stable," she confirmed. "We can move him in 20 minutes, carefully." Luis stood by the table, double-checking his gear. Field log, wire cutters, GPS. He looked pale, but focused. Ethan stirred a pot of coffee on the old wood stove, the scent rising like warmth itself. "We'll sweep the ravine first," he said. "That's where most of the traps were." Maya nodded. "We'll document everything. Photos, coordinates. If this is a poacher setup, we'll need to submit full evidence." She paused, glancing toward the bobcat, who now sat in the doorway again, back turned, tail curled lightly around its paws, watching the trees. Waiting. Luis followed her gaze. "Think it's guiding us again?" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't have to. They stepped into the snow, packs strapped tight, eyes sharp. The cold had softened since dawn, but it still bit at the skin. The forest had regained its voice. Crows now croaked in the distance, and the wind stirred the upper boughs. But the hush that had settled during the bobcat's arrival still lingered underneath it all. As they reached the tree line, the bobcat moved ahead. Not quickly, not erratically, just enough to keep leading. They followed. Every 100 feet or so it paused beside something hidden, a wire coiled beneath dead leaves, a sprung snare, a blood-stained patch of snow. Maya documented everything. Luis marked GPS points. Ethan reset the traps, flipping them open and disarming the jaws with practiced precision. By noon, they'd found over a dozen. The worst lay along a game trail, 3 steel snares and 1 body. A young buck, its side caved in by trauma, eyes long glazed, a trophy no one claimed. Louise stood over it, jaw tight. "Who does this?" Ethan's voice came quiet. "Someone who's forgotten what mercy looks like." The bobcat sat near the edge of the scene. Watching? Always watching. They worked for another hour, clearing, photographing, tagging each violation. Maya's hands moved quickly, but her expression had darkened. "This isn't a hunter," she said. "This is someone careless, maybe someone cruel." They'd need to alert enforcement, set cameras, maybe stake out the area, but for now, the forest came first. As they packed up to return, the bobcat gave a small, sharp chuff. It didn't wait this time. It turned and disappeared into the trees. Ethan felt its absence immediately, a cold in the center of his chest. But somehow he knew it wasn't a goodbye, just a pause. When they stepped back into the clearing, the adult coyote was still there, closer now. It stood just yards from the station, nose raised, ears perked. Inside, the pup whimpered. Maya approached slowly, voice low. "Let's bring them together." They radioed in a vet to meet them at the main turnout 5 miles down, where a soft release pen had been prepared. Ethan watched the trees as the station faded behind them, the sled bumping gently behind Luis. The bobcat was gone, but its path lingered, in broken traps, in paw prints, in the silence that had once been fear. Between the cruelty of steel and the quiet guidance of fur, the forest had chosen who it trusted. The sky was turning honeyed blue by the time they reached the turnout. The clearing, once used as a logging rest site, had been refitted by the state as a temporary wildlife release zone. A small, collapsible pen stood in the center, lined with pine boughs and fleece blankets. The scent of antiseptic still hung in the air from earlier field use. A veterinarian, Dr. Elena Rose, silver braid tucked beneath her parka, waited near the pen with a stethoscope still looped around her neck. Maya and Luis unloaded the pup with gentle hands. Its eyes fluttered open, blinked at the light, then closed again. Alive. Barely. Dr. Rose worked quickly, checking vitals, irrigating the wound again, rewrapping the leg. "He'll need rehab," she murmured. "But he's a fighter." Ethan didn't say anything. He was watching the trees. Maya joined him, eyes scanning the pines. "Do you think she'll come?" He shook his head. "Not her time. She's done what she came for." A sound broke the hush. Soft, deliberate footsteps through snow. Not the bobcat. The adult coyote emerged from the shadows like a figure from myth. No snarl, no rush. It came slowly, paused at the edge of the turnout, nose lifted, listening. Then, one step at a time, it crossed into the clearing. Everyone stood still. Dr. Rose stepped back, giving it room. Ethan opened the gate of the small pen. The pup lay still inside, nose twitching. The adult coyote padded forward, silent and sure. Then a sound, not a growl, not a bark, something softer, a high, breathy whine. The pup lifted its head, just slightly. The adult pressed its nose through the bars, a pause, then a touch, nose to nose. Recognition surged like warmth through the group, unspoken but undeniable. Maya covered her mouth. Louise turned away, blinking hard. Ethan didn't move. The bobcat was nowhere in sight. But in that moment, stillness settled again. Not the kind that empties, the kind that blesses, the kind that lingers like smoke or memory. The adult lay down beside the pen, curled its body along the outside of the wire. The pup inched closer from within, pressed nose to nose once more. No fear, just presence. Dr. Rose finally whispered, "We'll keep them here until nightfall, then release." Maya nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her sleeve. Ethan stepped back, boots crunching gently in the snow. The sun had begun to lower, casting long gold fingers through the trees. On a nearby hill, just for a moment, a shadow moved, a flick of a tail. A pair of amber eyes watching, then gone. Ethan smiled, slow and quiet. "She saw it," he whispered. "Some reunions are not ours to witness, but when they happen, the whole forest seems to breathe differently." The traps came out by the dozen. Maya and Louise spent the next 3 days combing the forest with enforcement officers, every ravine, every forgotten path, spring-loaded snares, barbed wire coils, old bait stations hidden under brush. They mapped, photographed, bagged them one by one. The cruelty had been sprawling and precise. Someone had known where animals passed. Someone had wanted silence, not survival. And yet the forest had spoken. Ethan filed his final report in the ranger station, typing with slow fingers into the old system. Case ID, date, coordinates, description of injuries, condition of the animal upon discovery. And then he paused. He scrolled down to the remarks field and typed only one sentence. "The bobcat showed me where to look." He stared at those words for a long time. Then hit submit. The coyote pup had been transported to a wildlife rehab center just outside Reno. Ethan received a call 2 days later. Its leg would heal. It would run again. The adult had remained nearby for over a day after the release, circling the perimeter. Waiting, a reunion, a promise kept. But the bobcat. She lingered only one more day. Ethan saw her just once more, mid-morning on the edge of the clearing. No sound, no call. She sat in the snow, eyes on him. Then without fanfare she turned and disappeared into the trees. No farewell, no pause, just the return of wild silence. He didn't follow. He stayed by the fire, eyes on the window. There was no need. Some presences are meant to visit, not to stay, and some debts are paid forward, not back. That night, as the frost crept over the porch and the wind settled into stillness, Ethan stepped outside and stood beneath the stars. They burned cold and steady over the Sierra, as they always had. But something felt different, not lighter, but more alive. In the quiet that followed, he realized, the wild remembers what the world forgets. Mercy passed on becomes its own kind of echo. Weeks passed, the snow thickened, then began to thaw. Tree branches shed their white coats, streams whispered back to life beneath the ice. The Sierra moved forward, as it always did, slow, unsentimental, eternal. But something in Ethan had shifted. He walked the old trails more often now, not to monitor, but to listen, to stand in the hush between pines and wonder who might be watching. He left water by the stump near the west ravine, left a piece of cloth, torn from the blanket that once warmed the pup, tied gently to a tree branch, fluttering like a prayer. He didn't see her again, but sometimes he thought he heard something at night, a crunch in the snow, a low chuff of breath. Once, a single paw print at the edge of the porch, faint but unmistakable. He smiled more now, because he understood. Some bonds are forged not by touch, but by trust. Some thanks are spoken not with words, but with footsteps returned. And some stories, like the one the bobcat gave him, aren't meant to be kept. They're meant to be shared. To remind us that the wild does not forget, that mercy once offered can echo, and sometimes it finds its way back, even to your door. If this story touched your heart, stay close. Here on Paw Prints and Stories, we believe some bonds never end.